Our history will begin with the creation of the Anglo-Japanese alliance, which was signed against Russian expansion. Little did they know that 3 years later Russia would be worried with its own internal conflicts. In 1905, a group of workers went to St. Petersburg Palace to make a protest against Tsarist regime. Nicholas II was the Tsar at that time. He ordered the massacre of the peasants and workers. This led to the beginning of the Russian Revolution and eventually the end of Tsarist regime. As Russia was involved in the revolution, the last battle they fought with Japan was the Tsushima Battle, and was the major naval engagement lost to the Japanese. Later that year, communist revolts came to Russia due to this lost war. In 1910, revolutions around the globe began to rise. In Mexico, peasants and workers raised in arms against the dictator Porfirio Díaz, who had the population living in repression and abuses. A year later, in the other side of the world, another revolution was taking place. The Xinai Revolution in China overthrew the Qing dynasty and established the Republic of China. Even though they won this war, 3 years later they lost the territory of Mongolia and had to recognize it as an independent state. 3 years later, in 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria is assassinated in Sarajevo during an official visit. This is known as the Sarajevo Incidents and became popular because it was the breaking point of World War I. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany saw this as an opportunity to expand his territory and gain power. After 5 years of endless battles, the war finally ended. It was necessary to establish the order and powers of Europe. Therefore, the Treaty of Versailles was created in order to punish Germany by reducing its army and creating the League of Nations. The beginning of the 20th century gave rise to a new era of technology, full of different inventions such as the Henry Ford's first successful creation of a car he exhibited, making the Ford label worldwide famous. Also, the first transatlantic phone call with the help of Graham Bell during World War I. And one of the most relevant nowadays was the invention of the light bulb by Thomas Alva Edison, who is known for his many innovative creations. Even though the world was progressing scientifically speaking, it was still stuck in the military conflicts and abuses. In 1920, Mexico rose in arms against their government as a response to the Calles Law, which prohibited Christian cult. This war is named the Guerra Cristera. At the same time, Palestine became part of the British Mandate. This made Great Britain to start gaining power after World War I and its devastations.
In 1936, in the American continent, two important things happened. In Mexico, during the government of Cárdenas, there was a railroad strike because of the many debts they had. In Argentina, there was a very similar event to the Bloody Sunday. Peasants and workers made a protest to ask for better prices of their products, but they were massacred. A year after greater conflicts started to rise, Japanese soldiers in China made a systematic network of rapes and murders to the Chinese population. This is known as the Nanjing Raping. It was the beginning of nearly a decade of war around the globe. In 1938, Germany entered Austria, guided by the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, defying the Treaty of Versailles, and after some time it was annexed to German territory. This was the breaking point of World War II. Allies declared war to Germany that same year. 2 years later, Germany attacked by air the British territory, and after 3 months of fighting, the British Air Forces got the victory. In 1943, leaders of the greatest powers in the world, meaning USSR and USA and Britain, got together in Tehran to discuss the situation and how to solve the war problems. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Joseph Stalin, leader of the USSR, and Theodore Roosevelt agreed in an alliance against German forces and that they would recognize Iran as an independent country. Sometime into the war, Japan made an alliance with Hitler. In order to take USA out of the picture, they attacked Pearl Harbor, naval base they had in Hawaii in 1941. However, in 1946, Roosevelt's successor, Harry Truman, ordered the response with a nuclear bomb attack to the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many casualties and damages to the environment.
As the war was over, the Nuremberg trials were held in order to judge Nazi leaders. The Allies achieved to bring 22 of the main leaders. However, the most important, like Goebbels and Hitler, had already killed themselves. In 1847, a year after the war ended, U.S. President Harry S. Truman came up with a Marshall Plan, whose purpose was to help rebuild Western countries with a $13 billion budget. And in 1951, Japan signed a peace treaty with USA and Truman, who was in the power, and with other nations with the intention to solve conflicts. World was beginning to see progress and a better future, but still there were some issues. In USA, the racial discrimination was getting higher and higher. Colored people began to rise against this injustice. Martin Luther King was the leader of the civil rights movement of black people, and with help of his followers, he achieved to make a difference. Another thing people were fighting for in this country was vote for females, and in 1957 that was finally granted, empowering women and making the world a place with less inequality.
As the Cold War was starting due to the mistrust between the Soviet Union and the USA, there was a conference held in Helsinki where 35 countries gathered and discussed this problem and communism expansion. That same year, a young man named Bill Gates created the Microsoft empire, which would later make him earn millions and millions of dollars. However, 2 years later, another intelligent young man, Steve Jobs, along with Steve Wozniak, created the rival for his enterprise called the Apple Company. Meanwhile, in 1976, China lost the main leader of communism in the country, Mao Zedong, whom earlier in his life led many workers to the Long March, where he wanted to keep communism alive. He is also remembered for the founding of the People's Republic of China. After Mao's death in 1977, another communist entered to the power.
4 years later, a major event was happening in Great Britain. Queen Elizabeth's son, Prince Charles, married Diana of Wales, who is known for being a role model, participation in charities for AIDS, leprosy, and many other diseases. However, they had a divorce after having 2 children, and in 1997, Princess Diana had a tragic car crash in Paris where she died. Some years later, after the beginning of the Cold War, USSR leader Gorbachev started to modernize the country with his progressive ideas. He came up with the Glasnost and the Perestroika that were policies to reconstruct economy and discuss publicly the problems Soviet Union had. Meanwhile, in Mexico, an earthquake of great magnitude had attacked the territories, causing some casualties and damages to cities. 3 years later, in 1988, Mexico signed a free trade agreement with USA and Canada.
In 1889, the Berlin Wall came down, allowing people to freely cross from one side to another, reuniting families and breaking the separation in Germany. We go back to China to see this event that happened at the same time than the previous called democracy in Tiananmen, which was a strike of students and workers that wanted more democracy. Chinese armies attacked and killed many. In that same year, in 1899, in a different country from Asia, one leader is murdered, Mohammad Zia. President of Pakistan dies in a plane who had an explosion. And in 1995, another head of state is killed. Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated in a peace rally. In 1994, a similar assassination happened when Luis Donaldo Colosio, who was a candidate for presidency, was killed before elections. It was of great impact because people hadn't seen that since Álvaro Obregón.
History cannot give us a program for the future, but it can give us a fuller understanding of ourselves and of our common humanity so that we can better face the future. Robert Penn Warren. It is said that studying history not only helps to know the culture, legacy, and contributions of civilizations, but also allows each person to build and create its own identity based on facts given or learned. We believe that it is important for any young student to know about Mexican and world history, in order to understand the reason of why our planet and societies are as they are now, but also to explore and analyze what our ancestors did wrong, the consequences, and find a solution in order to avoid making the same mistakes.